This is October 25th, 2008. We are going to be interviewing Donald Messenger of the Messenger family. Okay. Uncle Don, we're here this afternoon and we just want to talk about some family history. First thing we would like to talk about or ask you, when and where were you born?
Oh, I was born in Wichita, Kansas in December 14, 1920. And I don't remember much about that birth, to tell you the truth.
Were you born at home or born in the hospital?
I really don't know, but I think I was born in a hospital. And the doctor, I believe, was French because he spelled my middle name Jean. And until I went into the service, 21 years old, I didn't know that. So I had been always signing my name Gene, which was incorrect.
Ah.
So I had to.
So that was the first time you examined your birth certificate?
That's the first time, yeah, that I had to get my birth certificate, and therefore found out that it was Jean. So I figured that's Jean in French. So that was an enlightening thing.
Yes.
And when I was sworn into the service, all the other guys, they could take the oath and move on. I had to wait for some guy that had more authority, I guess, than one of the other fellows there, and consequently I had to hang in there, and then had to swear before him that I was who I said I was, and made some affidavit and change to that extent.
Going back in history, what can you tell us about your mother as far as how she was raised, where she was raised, and some of her history briefly?
Well,
who your mother was first also.
You know, things like that I probably knew when I was younger, but never tried to really keep them in mind, and just remembering some different things that my mother said, like she said she remembered riding on a wagon and riding a long ways, and because she had some relatives in Oklahoma, I really think that she was born in Oklahoma, but I don't know for sure. But just saying that when she was very young and she remembered that, and then when they got there, that's where they stayed. And so I believe that's when they moved to Wichita, Kansas.
What can you tell us about her mother?
Her mother?
Yes.
Her mother was, well, she was short like mother, even shorter, and very, very tiny person, really. And she really had a mind of her own. She was a born entrepreneur in her own right. And when I saw her was only when we go back for a vacation to Wichita, Kansas from California. And so as I was young, I only got to see her in spurts like that. And so I really never knew her really, really well. But she was always very kind to me and caring. And when her and her husband split, mother's dad, why she got into making and selling equipment for fish and snails and plants that grow in the water like they use nowadays in these little home aquariums and things. And she actually kept herself by doing that. And also she raised dogs, cows, for I guess more than 30 years, and sold dogs really all over. and kept herself up that way. And she was a very businesslike person, and having really no education, she was a marvel.
What was her name?
Uh,
Your grandmother's
well,
name?
Isa was her first name, and she of course, her first husband was Brannaman, William Brannaman, and she was married a couple of times after that and changed the name.
Do you know what age she was when she died?
I believe she was 94 when she passed away. Yeah, she probably would have lived longer, I think, but she had 3 steps that went down into the basement, and she fell down those steps and put her in the hospital, and she was in there for some time, and I don't know if she got pneumonia and died there, or whether she actually came home and lived there for a little while. I don't recall, since it's been so long ago.
What can you tell us about your mother's father and his name?
Tell them about the savings bond little stamp book she saved for you, your grandmother.
What's
And she
my
took
name?
you up to the bank.
We were back there when I was about 14 years old, and she says, you know, I put some money in the bank for you back when you were a baby, and so he says, I think it's time we close that account. And so she took me to the bank and to draw that out and give me what had amounted to less than $15, but for all that time, I guess it earned a penny or two every few months. Anyway, the ride up there was really something. She had her head in the back seat more than she did looking out the front, and it was a harrowing experience. But I'll never forget that. And she thought she could do anything, but I don't know how often she drove, but it obviously wasn't often enough.
Did
Yeah.
she have cottages? I understood that she had some cottages or something on her property,
Yeah.
and some stories about them.
Yeah, she did. She had, I don't know if they were there. She moved further out of town, and it was more of a rural atmosphere the last time that I was there. And she rented to some people there. Yeah, I think a couple of places. And I think she still continued to raise and sell the dogs at that place.
Again, going back to your, which would be your grandfather, what can you tell us about him when he was born, and his name, and what you know about him?
His name was William S. Brannaman. His middle name was Sherman, I believe. The S standing for Sherman, and which also Mother and Dad used for my brother Richard's middle name, Sherman. I don't remember a whole lot, again, because I didn't see him often, but he had worked for the post office, and apparently, I guess, the biggest part of his life, and they had a very nice home there, close to the river, and he was a really nice person, very quiet, and he was interested in stamps, being that he was, I believe he was postmaster there in Wichita, Kansas, and he was interested in stamps. So he had a great stamp collection, and he used to mount stamps, and some of them in different plates with frames and glass on them, and I know he sent some of them to to his son Glenn in Philadelphia. And he also sent me letters, actually with nothing in them, but just to get the postmark of some of the very first airmails. And figuring that at some point in time they may be valuable. I have several of those. I don't know where they are. And I've been looking for them, but I haven't run across them yet. But he used to send me a lot of stamps. So at one time I had a pretty good stamp collection. And other than that, he did woodwork as a hobby. And he built the table that Richard has currently. And I think it took him, I think, at least 2 years to build that. And I think he finished that, started in 1930, and I think he actually finished it about 2 years later.
Are there other items that
And he also made several sets of croquet mallets and the balls and the mallets. And another thing he did is he made checker tables with the squares on them so you could play checkers or chess. And he made those, some of them out of cedar wood. And I don't know how many he made, but it was kind of a standard thing he made, so he must have made them for several different people.
Did he sell those items, or were they more as a gift?
I really don't know whether he sold them or whether they were a gift, but I know he really enjoyed doing that woodwork. And he did that for after he divorced from Isa. Well, I know he did that work off and on, I guess, for a long time before he passed away. Until he came out to California to live with us, and he did not live long. I think maybe about 1 year, if that.
Do you know what his age was when he died?
His age? I think it was. I think he was about 68 when he died. So he died young. He passed away from actually cancer. We didn't realize that at the time, but that's the doctor said, oh, he just has a cyst, or what do you call it?
Tumor?
A tumor. Yeah, I'll take a tumor. But apparently, either he didn't know at the time, or they found it out after they got in there to operate. But I remember the doctor telling Dad that we really knew he had cancer, but I'm not so sure they did. I think they did that. They were just trying to make it easy on the folks. They didn't want to tell them that he had cancer.
Now, we understand you correct that he did die here in California, and did he die in a home or at home?
He died at home in the little room that the folks had at the house on 1024 Rialto. And yeah, he died there.
What can you tell us about your mother's siblings? Were they older, younger? What were their names?
I think Van, actually it's Vian, V-I-A-N. He was 10 years older than Mother, and I don't know how much older Glenn was, but he was older than Van, and I would guess 2 to 5 years, something like that. And Van worked primarily at the, I say primarily, I think he did odd jobs for a while until he got on at the Eagle newspaper in Wichita, Kansas, and he worked there for several years. And then he had a nervous breakdown, and after that he was just out of work for some time, and then I think he went to work for a school and started doing janitorial work because it was less stressful than at the newspaper, where the noise was terrific in the printing room. And I believe he stayed there until he retired on that.
And do you know the age of when either one of these men died?
I believe Glenn, the older brother, was, I think he was 92.
Yeah.
92. And Van, I'm not sure how old Van was, because I don't remember. Do you remember, Madeline? Me saying?
No, he died about 4 or 5 years ago. That's all I remember.
But they were both quite elderly then.
Yeah, they were
lived
elderly.
long lives.
Yeah, they had a long life, yeah, both of them.
What can you tell us about your father's upbringing and, of course, his full name and where he was born and so forth?
Well, Dad's name, Herman N. Messenger, and the N was just an initial. He didn't have a middle name. I don't know how come they tacked that in there, but maybe to differentiate from some other messengers. And Dad told me that the little toothpick holder that you have,
Yes,
it says 1906 on it, I believe.
yes.
And he told me that when he got that, they got it at a fair, and at the fair, he said that was the first time he ever remembered of seeing his dad. So he said, well, where was he prior to that? And I guess part of the time he was with some relatives, and other time the relatives had sort of farmed him out to people that weren't actually in the family as a worker. And he worked, he worked and did whatever they told him to do, and also they got him because they wanted to have a companion for their son. And however, the people, though they took care of him, they made him work, and he was not treated as their son was. And so he lived a lot to himself, and this really had a lot to do with making his personality what it really was, because he really did have a hard time and was shifted from one place to another. And he had very little schooling. I don't think he went past the 5th grade in school. And
Now, his own natural parents, what happened to them? Why was he farmed out to relatives and then, of course, other people?
well,
In that?
I don't know much about what really happened. I don't know why that his mother and dad divorced. His mother married another person, of course, and then she had 2 children by that husband. And then on his dad's side, why, he also married another person, and they had had 1 girl and 1, 2, 3, 4 boys.
So his parents were
Yeah.
divorced?
Yes, his parents divorced, and apparently, since he was at a very young age, like he said, the first time he saw his dad, in sometime during 1906. And because of that, that's because they were divorced. And I guess neither one of them, for one reason or another, took care of him. And that, I don't know, I'm not sure he knows, that he knew, because he never did give me any reason why that they split.
What were the names of his parents? Do you know that?
Of Dad's parents?
Yes.
Yeah. His dad was named Jesse Messenger, and his mother's name, Lily. I don't remember her. Yeah, her last name, her remarried name was Rouse, and she had 2 boys from
No.
another marriage.
He had half-brothers or siblings.
Yeah.
What were their names?
There. Okay. The half-brothers on his dad's side there were Floyd and Mel, Sam and Joseph, who were twins, and Francis.
Okay. Also, we understand that there was one Christmas when Grandpa Herman did not receive a gift, but yet the other boy received a gift. Do you remember this story when he was a boy?
Yeah, that time was the time when he was farmed out to one of these houses to work for this family, and they had the child, and yeah, at Christmas time, of course, they gave their child different presents, and they gave him, I believe, a little tiny metal train, little maybe 4 or 5 inches long, and of course it didn't have wheels that turned or anything. It was just a simple replica that cost little or nothing. And that's the way it was. How long he was there at that particular place, I don't know.
Are there any other stories that you know from either your father's childhood or your mother's childhood similar to this?
I know Dad worked out almost all his young life. He worked for somebody one place or another, and finally when he got, I think, 17 or 18, he drove taxi for a while, and that was, I guess, shortly after that, I think is when he met Mother. I believe he worked doing repairs on cars at that time somewhere, but I don't remember where. When we came to California from Wichita, I was approximately 3 years old, as near as I can calculate, and we landed in Highland Park, and Dad went to work for a laundry at that time. He worked there about two years, and at that time we moved to Santa Barbara.
Going back a little bit farther in time, what can you tell us about your father and mother and when they met, how they met?
Well, what I recall Mom telling me one time was that she and a girlfriend were downtown, and they noticed these 2 boys after a while were following them, and after a while they turned into some store. I don't know if it was I think it was a drugstore, and I guess the boys came in and got acquainted with the girls, started talking to them, and I remember that Mother told me that after they went together, that Dad had said to the other guy, he says, well, you take the girl on the right, and I'll try to get acquainted with a girl on the left. And later on, I realized why. It was because someone had told my dad that get a woman that is strong when you get married, and she'll be able to really be healthier and can work for you. And consequently, that's why he really didn't go through an experience, apparently, where, as we say today, oh, he's infatuated and fell in love with her, and and they dated and got married. So apparently, from what this person was and who that was that told him that, I don't have the faintest idea. I remember him telling me that himself, but not who it was. And so that's the only thing I know about their early relationship, I guess. And that was the only person Mother ever went with.
Who married? Did they marry in a church, or do you know who married them?
Well, they both were from Wichita, but they got married. They got married at another town. I believe it was, seeming like it was some little town about 20 miles away, but I don't recall what it was.
Do you know the year?
The name of it. It would, it was probably 1918.
Now, if they were both born in 1900, then they were both 18 years old, or real
No,
close?
Dad was born in 1899, and she was born in 1900. So in 1918, she was 18.
And he was 19 then, I assume.
Yeah.
Both families, do you know, or let's go back a minute. You said that your dad had little education. He only went to about 5th grade. On your mom, or speaking about your mom, about how far did she go through school?
4th or 5th grade.
And do you know
I think
either
the 4th.
4th or 5th grade for her also? Do you know either one of their favorite subjects? Did one of them like math more, or reading more, or something the other?
No, I just know that it was, I think they did really very well, considering that they didn't really have education to speak of.
Now, you mentioned something about your mother probably coming from Oklahoma. Do you know where your father's family came from originally? What part of the country or cities?
I think there was messengers, lived about 45 miles straight west of Wichita, it's called Kingman. It was at Kingman, Kansas. And it was out in that rural area, not around the town Kingman itself, but I think he lived out in would be the rural areas from there.
And that's where he also was farmed out to these other folks?
I believe so, yeah. I think all his young life was around the Kingman area.
Now, going back, you mentioned, of course, that they were from Kansas and traveled to California. Now, there's a famous family story about traveling and how they left you on the road. Can you tell us about that?
There was two cars came out from Kansas, and I can't remember what cars they had. But on the way out, they met some other person, I guess, and got acquainted, and so they all three came out as a little caravan of cars. And I remember my aunt telling me that they had so many flats and so on, and of course the roads were good. The cars didn't and driving that fast, but it took them 2 months to get from Kansas to California. I remember that.
And do you know what year they came and who came with them
Well,
from the family?
I think 1923, yeah.
And do you know who traveled with them out from the family?
I know the people. They were, Hamlin was their name, their last name, but I can't connect the Hamlins to our family, but there was a connection. We were related, but I really don't know. I think maybe that one of the families, it was Uncle Herman and Aunt Stell, and maybe that Aunt Stell was Isa Branneman's sister. That's what I'm thinking. That might be one. And the grandparents also came out here and lived until they died. They're Hamlin grandparents.
Do you know what the reason for coming to California was?
Not actually, but I think it had to do with the fact that they felt like that to the time that they had lived there, you know, it was pretty obvious that they weren't going to really do well, and so I think they came out to California with the thoughts of having maybe better jobs and a better life out here, but I'm not really sure. I'm just gathering that from knowing the people, and maybe that one of the kids in the Hamlin family, he got a job out here, and I don't know when that was or how it came about, but he worked for I used to know the name, a jewelry store in Los Angeles, Lawrence Hamlin, and he used to go out to these whistle stop places for the jewelry store, and they all had watches because they had to keep track of the time and when trains were due through there, and so he used to go out there and check their watches and reset them if they were the least bit off, because they had big, large pocket watches at that time.
Now, you said you were about 3 years old when they did travel out west to California.
Yes.
Now, on that road trip, we heard a story about that you were left behind on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm. No, it wasn't at that time.
Was that another trip?
That was a trip around Wichita, Kansas, or Kingman, one of the two. Yeah, and the time that we had I think they owned an Oakland, which was really old at that time. And a strange, Dad always seemed to have a car, even though he never seemed to make a lot of money. And they were going somewhere, and we had stopped at a roadside stand. And I don't remember if they bought some vegetables or got something to drink or what. I remember they bought me a Baby Ruth candy bar, and as Dad had just took off, and I was always sitting at that time on the outside, and the door opened, and I fell out. I don't remember how fast we were going, but it cracked my skull, and that's why I've been the way I am ever since.
Very funny.
So, yeah, I just remember that, I can still remember that to this day. I can remember I rolled and rolled, and I got up and was just sitting there, my legs spread out, and all of a sudden I came to my senses, and I looked around, said, "Where's my Babe Ruth candy bar?" And discovered it, you know, and by that time Dad had slammed on the brakes and got back there and picked me up and said, wait a minute, I got to get my candy bar, you know. And so we got back in the car and he said, well, Mother, you sit on the outside. But, so I got to sit in the middle from then on.
Are there any other stories that you remember in your childhood that might stand out?
Oh, one time when we were traveling back to visit the people in Kansas, our relatives, I thought it was interesting to me that we stopped at one of the, I think it was a Navajo tribe settlement, and there's a little stream that ran through there, and I remember Dad was trying to barter with them. We had canned goods in a box run on the running board of the car, and he was trying to bargain with them for something. I don't remember what that was. And I remember him showing them the can, it was one of the big cans of tomatoes, and he's showing them the picture on it because naturally he didn't know the language. And I remember seeing little kids out there just kind of off in the distance, couple of 200-300 feet, I guess, and they were all playing in the stream, and most of the little kids were naked, and I mean little tots, and it was hot as the blazes, but I enjoyed seeing the Indians, and it was a time at that time that was just very, you know, rural and old. It looked like you would expect an Indian settlement to be, and you don't see anything like that nowadays, you know. And that was very interesting to me. I always remembered that. And we stayed there several hours, talking to them, trying to converse, and Dad bartering. It was kind of interesting. But I can remember other times that when we lived in Santa Barbara, why Dad, we joined the Salvation Army up there, and Dad was a scoutmaster for the boys, and he and another fellow. And so I can remember going with them out and camping overnight in the mountains somewhere there near the Santa Barbara area, and that was always great fun. I remember that.
Now, we also heard that there was a story, something about your father judged something in a store or a store window and won you a wagon. Do you know that? Remember that story?
Oh, yeah, during the Depression, why, one of the stores, I think it was a Piggly Wiggly, was the name of the grocery store, and so as an inducement to bring in people, why they had a wagon in the store, and it was full of groceries, and of course covered over with some cellophane or something. And to win it, why, you were to guess how long it took for the pigeons to fly from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles, I believe it was. And Dad said, he wrote down there, I think it was 5 hours and 13 minutes, because Dad always said 13 was his lucky number. And so he put 5 hours and 13 minutes, and then he started to stuff it in the box, and then he said, no, I'm going to add on some seconds, and I don't remember how many seconds he added on, but it ended up that he won that.
By the fact that he put the seconds on there,
Yeah,
that
the
made
fact that he put the seconds on there, it was just super close. And of course I got the wagon, and of course the family got the groceries. And that was a blessing, because finances were so tight at that time.
What do you remember or know from stories that your parents told you when they first moved out here to California? especially in the Santa Barbara area. What can you tell us about that time period?
Well, I don't know anything too special, except it was a time, as I remember, that we sure had a lot of earthquakes after we moved there. They had a great earthquake 1925, and we moved there in 26, I believe it was, and there was still lots of rubble from buildings that were tore down from that earthquake. And one of the big ones was a place called the Arlington Hotel, and there was still the rubble from that hotel was there when we moved there, and was there for some time. I don't remember whether it was probably a couple of years later. They actually tore it all out and they built the Arlington Theater, which is still there to this day. One of the prettiest theaters I've ever seen, all Spanish architecture. As I recall, lots of the families that I talked to at the time said, you know, I guess they had some aftershocks, and the people actually, a lot of them camped outside in a tent in the yard, and for several days, because they were worried maybe that they'd have another big shock and the house might come down.
Your parents and your family, where did they live? Did they live close to the beach or more inland?
The whole 8.5 years we lived in Santa Barbara, we lived about 5 blocks from the beach. We always lived close to the beach.
Were they renting a home, or renting apartment in an apartment house, or other arrangements?
Well, they rented about, I don't know, some maybe 4 or 5 years. 5 years, yeah, oh yeah, at least 5 years, or maybe 6, and then we took over an apartment house, and Dad's responsibility was to take care of it, keep it up, and keep it rented. They rented rooms and a couple of apartments, and then we took a vacation trip to Wichita, and they had got somebody to fill in, take care of it, a woman that was single. And so when we came back, why, the woman had talked the woman that owned the house into letting her keep running it instead of the folks, and that caused us then to have to move. But at that time we didn't pay any rent, and that was really great. And after that we rented until we left there and moved to San Bernardino.
Now, besides being the apartment manager type of situation, what other type of work did your father do, and why they were living there?
Originally, when we moved to Santa Barbara, he went to work for the Buick agency. He was an auto mechanic at the Buick agency for probably five years about. And then he went to work for Bankline Oil Company, which was north of Santa Barbara. They had a place up there where the tankers would come in and they'd fill them up there, and I don't know where they went to from there. And he took care of the shop that worked on the trucks and things like that, and that was probably the best job he had. He made pretty good money at that job, but it didn't last long because the Great Depression hit, and He only worked there a few short months, and then he was out of work. And he never worked for any business or concern after that, as long as we were in Santa Barbara. He just did odd jobs, worked on people's cars, and the company that we took milk from, they delivered it, you know, in those days to your house. And that company would hire him periodically to do some work on some of their trucks, and then they would cancel our milk bill that we had run up. And we also got butter and cottage cheese from them. And also, one thing Dad did was, he and one of the other fellows from the church, they drive from Santa Barbara clear down here to San Bernardino, actually Fontana, and they get these large fresh eggs, and then they'd take turns driving, so they'd drive down and back, you know, almost in one day. And then they get some sleep, and then they would go out door to door selling fresh eggs. That's one of the things he did during the Depression. I don't recall how long he did that, but I guess it really helped. And apparently during that time, why, his dad, who lived in Kansas at, I don't remember the name of the town, but they had moved to San Bernardino during that time sometime. And because the next time I saw them, I had seen them back in Kansas, and the next time I saw them, they were out here in San Bernardino. And he worked for a chicken ranch out in Fontana. And so I think that's how Dad happened to move to San Bernardino, because of that contact. They went to church. Well, he didn't, but Viola, Jesse's wife, did. And one of the fellows at the church he and another fellow owned a produce company, and so they spoke to them, and they needed a mechanic. And so they said for Dad to come down and see him, and so they hired him. That's how come we moved from Santa Barbara to San Bernardino.
Before we
That was
leave,
July 1934.
before leaving Santa Barbara, or the subject of Santa Barbara, from what Grandma Goldie said, that you came home there's a story where you came home one day from a meeting or something from the Salvation Army, and
Me?
Yes, you. And that's how they became involved in the Salvation Army and their salvation and so forth. What can you tell us about that?
What really happened was, of course, I was very young when I moved there, and the Salvation Army was just, it was on one corner and one block down Chapala, and around the corner about two houses where we lived, so it was very, very close. And so they had a really, really nice gymnasium with all the mats and the equipment that you use in gymnastics, springboard and rings hanging from the ceiling and all those things. And so once a week during a weeknight, I don't remember what night it was, but they would have the kids come in and they could play in the gym and shoot baskets and things like that. And afterwards they would have a get-together upstairs, and they usually have a little, the pastor's wife would have a little sermonette, and then they would show flicks Felix the Cat and other ones at that time. They were really old. And did I get off the subject?
Salvation Army.
Uh,
How long was the
that-
family involved with the Salvation Army,
Yeah.
and what was the involvement with
Actually,
your parents?
Well, because I went there and did that, I would keep telling them about, the kids I'd meet and things like that, and how much I enjoyed it. And so one Sunday, no, I think it was one of the weeknights when they had that, but they had asked for the kids who wanted to accept Jesus to come forward, So I did that, and I went home and I told them, and so apparently Holy Spirit was working on them, and they said, I think it's about time we look into that. And so the folks went up there and sat in the meeting, or 2 and 3, and I don't know how long they went, but they went a while, and then they ended up joining Salvation Army, and so they became members, and that's when they started going to church steady. That's where they first had an experience with the Lord. And then we left that church about a year before we moved out of Santa Barbara. Yeah.
Now, we know that my dad, Richard, was born in Santa Barbara. What do you remember about that time? Of course, you were the only child for quite a few years,
Yeah.
and he was born. What do you have as far as memories during that time and that event?
Well, I remember him being born, and he was born in a little house in the back, like in the backyard of a main house, because that was the first place that we went when we moved there, and we didn't have any money, so very little, and Dad got the job at Buick. Well, when Richard came along, why, I remember they said, we want you to go up and stay with the, don't recall the women's names, that there were 2 sisters who owned the house and the property, the house in front and all the property in the house in back, and they rented it to the folks. So I went up there and stayed with them. They entertained me, and I remember when I came home, Mom was in bed, and so I remember that particular day very well. I can see it in my mind's eye just like I was there.
Wow.
And I was 7.
Wow.
And
Well, that's just like yesterday, that memory.
yeah, I can remember it just like it was yesterday.
Do you remember anything else?
Mm.
How life changed after having a little baby brother?
No, things like, 7 years apart makes a difference. I remember things like Richard would bump something, fall over or something like that, and he'd start squalling, and then Dad would come in and paddle me because he figured that I did something bad to him. That happened several times. And of course, when you're wrongly accused, things like that you remember well. And yeah, I really remember that. Yeah. What did you do to him? I didn't do nothing, Dad. What did you do to him? I'm innocent, Dad. We went through this routine, and I don't remember a whole lot about other things other than I remember telling Mother, Richard's flies in my soup. I remember Mom reminding me of that ever so often. When there's that many years difference, you're just not in the same wavelength.
What about the house? Do you remember the house, and is it still there? Have you ever gone back to see?
Let's see, the first place we lived was there because I took Madeline there to see this little house in the back, and I walked around. There was a sign out in front that the house there had a business in it. I didn't see anybody there, so I walked down the driveway, and yeah, the house was still there. And I picked up my camera to take a picture of the house, and it was just a little square cracker box. These people came around the corner. "What are you doing in here?" You know, and so I answered them. Well, by the time I got through talking to them, it was already getting dusk,
Oh.
and
what
so
a
I
shame.
didn't get a picture of it. But it's still there.
Do you know what street this is on and about what block, roughly?
I know exactly where it is, but I don't remember the streets. It's Chapala is the north-south street. Or should I say no? It's probably the east-west street, and the other street, I don't remember. It's probably Della Vina, but I'm not sure.
If you saw a MapQuest, could you find it that way?
Yeah,
We'll have to do that.
yeah, I know exactly where it is.
Going to San Bernardino or moving to San Bernardino, what events do you remember that was special about that?
The special thing I remember about it was I thought we had moved to the edges of hell, because it was summertime, July, and Santa Barbara was so neat. It got hot up there, but we were always close to the ocean. And when we moved there, it was the hottest place I think I've been in my life. And I really remember that. And I remember when I got acquainted with kids at school and all, I said, "Man, is there some place you can go swimming around here?" And so, of course, they brought me in line with where all the possible places were. Fairmount Park and Riverside had a pool, and it was a crummy looking pool, and the water was not heated at all. It was just whatever the outside temperature was, and it was freezing cold always. But we swam there. And then there was another swimming pool out on Base Line, way out in Highlands. I don't remember what they called it, but it was an old place you'd tell had been there a long time. And we used to ride our bikes out there and go swimming. And then third place we used to go swimming was there's a canal that they used to water the orange groves. It runs clear from San Bernardino over through Riverside. And we see that canal as we come by Van Buren on the way to town or church every day. It's still there. And there's a box out there, and this was out by close to where the San Bernardino Air Base is. And so I don't know what this box was for, but there were some gates there where they could dump the water into the wash. And it was like a cemented-in swimming pool. So we used to swim there, and then later on they built Cope and Plunge, and that was a heated pool, and that was the greatest. They had a 3-meter board and a 1-meter board, and that was great. That was my recollection of my first moving here, the first year or so.
Do you remember where you moved or where you were living, and would that house or apartment be there today?
Yeah, it was 1324 Rialto Avenue, and when we moved there, it was really just a little shack, and Dad had started working for the first time in 3 years, and I don't remember a whole lot about the house. It was just a little dinky house that looked like it had been built onto. had a garage.
Were they renting this house?
They what? Rent, yeah, they rent. Yeah, I remember the rent was $10 a month. And at that time, there was a rickety garage, and even the car we had, you couldn't get the whole car in the garage. It'd still leave the doors not quite shut. And yeah, we lived there. Remember, we lived there. See, 8th grade, 9th grade. So 10. I think we lived there about 3 years before the folks bought the house on. Well, it was on Rialto Avenue. With it, then they bought a house on Rialto Avenue.
Do you know the address of that house?
Yeah, 1024 Rialto. Yeah.
What do you remember about going to school in San Bernardino?
Well, I remember I started the 8th grade and went from the 8th grade through 12th grade, and I went to
Do you know what school?
JC. Yeah, Richardson Junior High, San Bernardino High School, and Valley College. I was on the track team always, every year that I was in school.
Did you have any other interests or hobbies as a young child or even as an older child in your teen years?
We built model airplanes. Started that in Santa Barbara when I was 9, and built model airplane. Built little solid wood models, and then later on we got into rubber band flying models, and that just kept going on for some time until finally into little gas models. And never really got into any other hobbies.
Do you have any of those pieces today?
No, I don't have a one, because they all burned in the fire in the garage that Dad and Mom rented next door. They had a fire in there. I don't know what caused it, but all of them burned, because that stuff burns so readily anyhow.
What can you tell us about the fire, do you know?
No, I don't know. I don't even know what was in there, to tell you the truth, except all my models. And there was a large B-24 that Richard and I was building. I was already working in Convair, who built the B-24, and they're the ones that, in San Diego, they're the ones that designed it and built it, and then it was subsequently built by other companies like Ford during the war. And we had a big model in there, about a 10-foot wingspan, and we had a lot of it built. Fuselage, stabilizer, tails, and parts, the center section of the wing, it all burned up. It was sad, because I especially would have liked to have the little models I built when I was 9 and 10 and 11, 12, back in those years.
Those would be neat to have, of course.
Yeah, and I don't know what started the fire. I know that the people that owned it belonged to the Brethren Church, and once a year they'd all get down there in that garage, and he had a machine to make popcorn, and so they would make popcorn balls, and then I guess they had a blowout at the church of some sort, and I don't know, sold them or gave them away or something, and maybe it was some equipment of something that he had in there. I don't know really what caused it. I'm not sure they ever knew. But sure, it burned up. I think it burned up everything that was in there that Dad had stored and I had stored.
What could you tell us, or tell the family, about one of your wild days as a teenager.
My wild days?
Yeah, we all sow our wild oats at some point in our life. What was one of the things that you did sowing your wild oats?
Well, I never considered myself a wild kid because, you know, I knew kids that I went to high school with, and of course a lot of them are really drinkers. They'd get together. I don't know how they could afford it, except some of the kids, of course, had families whose parents made pretty good money. And, you know, I even if I wanted to, I really couldn't afford that type of thing. But as far as doing wild things, I never got too wild till after I was out of high school. And
What did you do after you were out of high school?
well, I did things that I'd never want to talk about.
So we don't get to know those
You
secrets?
know, you get no details there. I tell you, I went. Let's see. I went with some girls. And I used to go to the Lake Gregory. Was one of my main hangouts. Weren't wild things I did, but they were fun things. I used to go to Lake Gregory during the summer. Many times, many weekends, even though I was working in San Diego. I could drive up and stay the weekend here and drive back to go to work. And so we used to go to Gregory. There was a a young couple. I say young, well, I guess you call them middle-aged today, but they really weren't old middle-aged. And they were writers for the movies, some movie industry in Los Angeles. And so they had this place up there, Lake Gregory, and they had a little dance floor and a jukebox and a fountain. And so lots of young kids would get together there. And so I used to go there and dance a lot.
About how old were you at that time?
Oh, I was 18, 19.
Now we
19, yeah, 19.
As a
maybe
family,
20.
we know that you're married to Madeline and love her dearly, but can you tell us briefly about your first marriage? Briefly.
Well, Nadine, whom I married when August 29th, 1942, and we actually knew each other because the families knew each other from church. And she was younger than I, about 4.5 years, and I never did ever even think about dating her, but it just happened that our mothers were talking, and I guess Mom told me something, and so I asked her to ask the mother, you know, about the daughter and if she would, you know, be interested in dating me, you know. And she said, yeah. She was not the one I married, but her sister. And so I came up here, and what was it? And with my cousin, who was from Kansas, and we dated the two girls, took them bowling, and when we were trying to get a lane open, why I got out of the car and said, "Well, wait, I'll go in and see if they got any openings in here." And when before I got back, why Nadine had come in. Well, she was with my cousin, and so we switched girls at that time, and so then Nadine and I dated from then on.
That was
until we
your
got-
first date?
Till we got married, that was our first date, yeah. And, yeah, and then we dated not long, see, we can't remember just what that time was, but we were married in 42, I don't know, we went together a few months, several months, and broke up a couple of times. It should have been a good indication of things to come.
We don't learn easy, do we?
No, we all learn the hard way, I think. Yeah.
Is that a messenger trait or is that a human
There's a
trait?
messenger. There's a message in that, yeah. Most people, well, they're getting into philosophy. Many people who go together, that go together for a year, think they really know that person. And they really don't.
Not until you
If
live
I
with them.
was, if I was telling people to date, I'd say go even longer.
Now, of course, you were married to Madeline and been married to her for many years. What can you tell us about meeting Madeline later in life and your marriage with her?
About when I met her. Madeline went to another church, and she knew some women from, I don't think it was the church that she was going to at the time, but a former church that she'd gone to. She knew these two girls, and these two gals had been going to Melodyland where I was going to church. And so one of them invited Madeline to come, and she had just come back from a year in Taiwan. And so they said, we're going to sing the Messiah, and you already know that from being in choirs before, so it won't be like learning new music, so why don't you come? And they this girl kept kind of bugging her, and so finally she said that she told her to, yeah, well, come by and pick me up, and I'll go just for the Christmas program. She'll sing Messiah. And so then when she called the gal up to come after, she says, well, she says, let me call LaVon and see if she'll come after you. So the gal had been bugging her about coming, and then she didn't want to go pick her up because in the opposite direction. So she called this other gal, and she said, yeah, I'll bring you. So she went and got her, and so then as we were practicing, then I got acquainted with her and then asked her for a date. And the date that I asked her for was the church in San Bernardino was having their Christmas program at a really nice place up in the mountains. I think up by Lake Gregory or somewhere up there. They had the Christmas program, I guess, a couple of times before that. And so I asked her if she could go, and she agreed to go. That was our first date. And that turned out to be a great one.
Turned out to be really good.
That turned out to be a real good. That paid dividends.
How long did you date and go together before you actually married?
Boy. Well, we went together from
We're going to put you in hot water now.
yeah. Well, the 19th of 1 year, and the following year, September 15th, we were married.
What can you tell us
So
about
it's a
your
little less
wedding?
than a year. What
What could you tell us about your wedding?
about the wedding? Well, the wedding was, we had a great wedding. I had I had run around with a younger group at church, and some of these kids had gotten married during the time. And so I thought, I'm old, but, I didn't have a church wedding. I think it'd really be nice. And I asked Madeline, and she went along with it. And so we decided to have a regular church wedding rather than go someplace and with just the two of us. And it turned out to be great. We were glad we did it.
Okay. Putting you on the spot, Can you tell us the exact day, date, and the place?
That we got married?
Mhm.
Oh. Let me see, we got... We got married September the 15th, 1972 at Melodyland in Anaheim.
How long have you been married to this date, today,
36 years.
and happily so?
Yeah, very happily.
Can you tell us a secret that contributes to that happiness?
Yeah. Patience. Don't try to make the other one to be like you want her to be. Remember that she has a personality and I have a personality. And women are from Venus and men are from Mars. And that's really true. We're that different, even though we care about each other. Each have different personalities. So many breakups are because they think there's something you don't like about the person prior to marriage, but you don't think about it. You think it's going to all work out fine after, and it becomes larger after, and consequently problems.
So would Madeline agree with all that?
Oh yeah,
Okay. So you're not in hot water.
I'm not in hot water.
Backing up in
If she
time,
doesn't, I'll have a counselor later.
we'll send you there maybe. Going back in time, what can you tell us about going in the armed forces?
Mm.
What branch and when,
Well-
and just a little bit of your experiences there.
Well, I really, because I was a tool maker, and tool makers were scarce in the aircraft industry, and I actually was deferred from my draft board several times. But finally, you know, you're young and you think about, man, I got to get in there and do my part and be a part of this program. So I actually ended up taking the test for the Air Force training and the initial test that they give you, and I passed that. So I decided I would join the Air Force.
And what was
So-
going on as far as our nation at that time?
Our nation.
Was,
Yeah.
was
Well,
it
they-
wartime? Was
yeah,
it
they had,
peacetime?
yeah, they had already been. See, December 7th was December 7th, 1941, right? And this was, I didn't go in the service till December 43, and I was in until December 45. So I spent 2 years in there, but I went directly into pilot training, and what happened was there's only 3 pre-flight schools in the United States, but there were lots of colleges that they sent the guys to, but all of them had to go through these 3 pre-flight schools. And they had one in the East, and one in the Midwest, and one right here at Costa Mesa. And so each time I went through a phase, then they would send us to some field just to pull duty for some time to wait for the next phase. So that's my basic Army life. That's what I did, because it slowed down. We couldn't figure out why, and we didn't understand it, what had happened there, that they were getting so pokey about getting the guys through, because normally you could go through your total training, maybe I'd take it about 9 months, something like that. And what was going on there is they knew they were going to drop the atom bomb, and because of that way, they started thinking ahead, and then they closed some of the colleges and to push the guys on through. they all had to filter through these 3 pre-flight schools, and it just made a big long waiting list. And then not long after that, they dropped a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and so we just marked time, and they for a little while, and then they told us that we could either stay in the service and sign up for a full hitch or take a discharge. And you had your choice, and so I took the discharge because I had, at that time I was already married when I was in the service, so I wanted to get out.
Did you travel at all while you were in the service? Have that opportunity?
Other than going to different fields, I was inducted down at Fort MacArthur in San Pedro. And the first place I went was to Shepherd Field in Texas Panhandle, and then I went to a field in Sacramento, and from there I went to college in Cedar City, Utah. And from Cedar City, Utah, I went back to the same field in Sacramento. And then I went to Victorville, George Air Force Base in Victorville. And then I went to Ellington Field in Houston, Texas. So I did travel around to the different bases like that. And I learned to speak Texan while I was in Texas. So when I met Madeline, it was really good. I understood their words, and I told her I'd already learned the language when I met her. Strange thing, both my first wife and my second wife are from Texas.
Maybe there's
So
something
Texas,
there.
Texas has nice girls. Yeah, they do. Yeah.
What can you tell us about becoming a Christian, taking the Lord as your Savior for your own personal experience?
Well, like I said, I accepted the Lord when I was a little kid in Salvation Armies in Santa Barbara, and I did what I thought was right for some time till I started running around, and when I got out of school and started working in Convair in San Diego, and I started running around, and can't get into too much detail with that, with the Texas ears over there listening. So
Okay.
that's
We know that as one of your things that you did in ministry was travel sometimes to South America to
Yeah.
a few different places to help build churches and so
Mhm.
forth. What can you tell us that you remember about those particular travels? Any experience or events that you remember that stands out?
Yeah, this particular church I went to, which is actually Assembly of God in Westminster, California, and they decided that they'd have a help out the Wycliffe Bible translators, and they needed a building built down on actually it was a Chiquita banana plantation there, and the workers had there was a little town there that the workers lived in, and there was a church, but it was nothing but some logs with some branches, palm branches, I guess, or something like that on the roof, and I don't remember just what they sat on. I think it was like a log sawed in half. They sat on, and there was, no back, no sides, and the front of it was kind of a backdrop, I guess, that helped to carry the sound. I don't remember just what. It was just a little tiny church, and so we went down there and built them a church. And the missionary who lived in San Juan, Puerto Rico, they got all the necessary lumber down there and things like that, and with the natives there, they poured this cement base and got the blocks ready, and then we came down and picked it up from the floor, and then built it on up from there. That's the first trip I went on. And after that, I helped build buildings in Quito, Ecuador, twice. This work was all for the Wiggly Bible translators. Yeah, that's right. We built a building to use for translation in a place called Loma Linda in Colombia, and it was way out, way out over the Andes into the jungles and they had a big compound out there with a lot of huts, and the missionaries all lived there, and they all worked with the various tribes that were around, and there were some, tribes out there that were just like the tribes in Africa and places like that. And we built a building there, and they would go out and bring in somebody who was willing to come in with them, and then they tried to work in a language, get a written language, because most of them didn't have any written language at all, and they spoke either Spanish or some dialect like that.
What could you tell us? I know Grandma Goldie has told us a couple stories, and even Grandpa Herman, that you might call spiritual stories, or something where they've seen something or experienced something truly supernatural. What can you tell us about any of your own personal experiences along that line?
Well, I had one experience, and it was like it was real. And that was an experience, and I couldn't figure out, but did I dream this, or did I just see this? Because the sensation was real. And this is when God comes back to bring the saints up in the air and meet them in the air, and I went up and I could look down, I could see these people, where gravity had released them, and we were going up, and you could see them in the air like that, and it was one of the most real things I ever had happen.
Were you awake at that time, or were you waking up from a dream type of?
No,
or praying, or?
No, I was in bed, but I've dreamed. I had lots of dreams, down through life. But this was not like a dream. It was more real, like I was really there. And the sensation of gravity releasing, like that. And another time I had a real experience was after I was saved. They keep saying, well, you got to seek for the baptism. So Sunday nights I go up there to the altar and seek the Lord for the baptism, which is really, you don't have to work for it. It's a gift. So gifts are given. You don't work for gifts. And so I sought the baptism for quite a while, but finally I did, and I had a real experience, because I all of a sudden, I don't know where I am, but then I had an out-of-body experience, and I'm raising up like this, and I'm looking back down, and there I am laying on the floor, and I could see me, and I was laughing. I have never laughed that hard in my life till it hurt, and I said, Lord, don't pour any more in. I can't stand anymore. And it was like, it's liquid love that He's pouring into you, inside. And it kept saying, I can't hold anymore, I can't hold anymore. And I'm up here, I'm looking down at this happening. And then I remember I'm coming down, and pretty soon I'm in my right mind, I know where I was. But during that time, I don't know how long it was, I was different, definitely an out-of-body experience, because I could see myself doing this. And I never had that happen since.
Any other instances of something
Any
along
other-
that line?
Anything like it. But it's one of the things that no matter what, if I lived another 200 years, I would remember it just like it was today. Very, very definite, positive. These are a real experience. And lots of people, they don't have an experience like that, even though they have the signs that they have received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Yeah.
Grandma Goldie once told me something about some relatives, and I'm not sure where they were living at that time, but they were involved in spiritualism and where they did some levitating. Do you?
Yes, there's in the Hamlin family, there were several kids. I to this day can't put them together. I have a person that lives up here in Hesperia. I call him my cousin because when we go to L.A., we used to always want to go to his family because he was 3 years younger than I am approximately, and his dad and I think there was Lawrence and Ollie and Victor. That's the one you're talking about, that was into spiritualism, and another one. And I can't tie the relationship to it, but they were all in the Hamlin family, which was somewhere tied to us. And he got into spiritualism, and he wanted Dad to get into that with him. And so I remember one day they came over, and I guess they lived around us apparently at that time. I think it was in Highland Park, and they took Dad over to a neighbor's house, and they had a meeting over there, and so they told him, this is real and so on like that, and they said, we can tell you how much money you have in your pocket, and I guess they did, so spiritualism is real, but it's really of Satan. I remember that family, Victor was his name, and I can't remember her name, and as far as I know, they followed that. And but they were not very close to us from that time on. When we moved to Santa Barbara, we rarely saw them.
What are your special interests today? We talked about some of your special interests when you were a child or a teenager. What do you enjoy today?
What do I enjoy doing?
Or some of your special interests, hobbies, that type of thing?
No, I wouldn't say I really had a hobby, but I enjoy plants and keeping my place, trees and plants, and flowers of some sort. I only have a few, the blooming plants right now, but I always enjoyed that. And of course, I've always been very active in going to church and in the things that they do, and being in the musicals that we did at Melodyland, and we've done several at Bethel Christian Center there in Riverside, and been active in all that. but I don't have a specific hobby. I always enjoyed picture taking for a number of years. Swimming was always one of my enjoyable things that I did.
What can you tell us about your career through life in just kind of chronological order, briefly? What have you done as far as work?
I've done a number of jobs. You know, I've been a machinist. Of course, I learned in high school, and was a machinist at Convair and a tool and die maker there. And after the war was over, I went to work for Kaiser Steel, and did machine work there. That's very heavy machine work. I mean, we have big machines, and we handled big pieces. And then I went to work for Benny Giebler, my friend, who during my junior high and high school days we used to build model airplanes together, and he lived across the street. And he started a machine shop after World War II and kept bugging me to come to work for him, which I finally did. And then he overextended in some equipment that we were making many of, garden tractors, and the sales cut off so fast that he almost went under. So I had to find another job. That's when I went to work for North American Aviation. And in there I did a number of jobs. I did tooling work again, and I work in the methods department.
Were you involved in any big projects
For
at
that.
North American?
Big projects? I don't know. Well, everything we did usually was big.
What did
We
it,
did. We just did the necessarily tooling things, what I did most of the time, and we had some methods and helping figure things that different special tools that we required to make special particular pieces. I did that for quite a while.
we understand that you worked on the space shuttle?
Yeah, well, the last place I was at, yeah, I worked on the space shuttle and different groups in tool engineering were assigned. Each group was assigned a particular part that you worked on, and mine was what was called the forward fuselage, which was the compartment where the people were, was actually a completely welded up airtight capsule, but that went inside of the outer fuselage, and I worked on the outer fuselage that encompassed that thing, and set up tooling on that, and was responsible for any kind of tool required to work on that particular part of the space shuttle.
Did you work on just one space shuttle, or do you know the names?
Well, the same tooling
Went on all of them?
went on all of them, yeah. But of course, you had constant engineering changes, so you had to take care of those as they came along, and there was always something. And I worked on that until I retired, and saw that from the beginning up through building, but we built five shuttles.
Did you contribute to the Challenger?
Challenger, oh yeah,
Space
yeah,
shuttle? Yeah.
naturally.
What do you
Changes.
feel is your strongest point, and what do you think is your weakest point? Your strongest maybe talent, and maybe what your weakest.
My talent, Well, I had a talent for reading prints, for one thing, because I had different guys in tool planning and production planning. If sometimes they couldn't figure out a print, they'd bring it down to me, even though it wasn't my job. But, and ask me to help them figure out different things, and they couldn't get the picture of it, and then sometimes I'd draw them a picture that they could, without any extra lines on it, dimension lines, or hidden lines and stuff like that makes it more confusing. So I was good at that, which makes it easy to read maps and things like that. This kind of goes along with it.
Now, weakest area in your life, or your weakest point in your personality,
My weakest point?
or shortcoming?
I know yeah, not being aggressive enough. My weakest point, I don't like confrontations. I've always been a quiet person. So, and I really should have been a lot more aggressive right from the beginning. Because there are times when you really need to.
Okay. Almost at our end of our interview, but what do you think was maybe one point in your life that you might call the darkest time or the deepest valley you've gone through?
Yeah, I think the darkest time of course, is when both of the kids were killed.